A friend of mine was involved in a triple fatal.
Are you able to be friends with a person like that?
Don't think I've spoken to him since then.
Do you think that's right? Owen, you have devoted your time into saving lives through road safety.
Today we're using it to target dangerous driving.
Speed doesn't necessarily cause you to crash.
But driving on a mobile phone is seatbelts. If it is causing a loss of life, are we not doing something about it?
There's only so much that we can do.
I don't necessarily agree. That issue could be stopped tomorrow.
When you deal with what we deal with, nobody gets a chance to say goodbye and tell somebody the person that matters most to them is never coming home. It leaves something on you that you will never forget.
Owen, thank you for joining me today. You have devoted a great amount of your time into saving lives through road safety. So my first question to you today is, what is your mission? Why does it matter so much that you are doing what you're doing?
When you deal with what we deal with and you go to what we go to on the roads, and then you have to go and knock on the door and tell somebody that the person that matters most to them in their life is never coming home, it leaves something on you that you will never forget.
So prior to that happening and prior to experiencing a moment like that, would your answer to that question have been completely different when you first got into this then?
I've been doing this now for, well, not the social media stuff, but I've been doing a day job for 21 years. And I remember every single door knock I've done. And I remember every one of those messages that I passed. And if I can stop a family from receiving that news, then all the work that we put into GCM is worth it.
So to add context to the viewer, you just mentioned 21 years. What exactly is it that you do now? And what have you done over that 21 years?
So what I do now is road casualty reduction. So I work under roads policing. So basically I'm a traffic sergeant. But my specific role and that of my team, I've got 5 on my team that cover the whole of Devon and Cornwall. Our role is to reduce casualties on the road. We do that by various means. We do it by proactive patrol. We do it by partnership working with other agencies. We do it with the stuff like what we do on GCM, and why I'm sitting here with you now. So there are lots of different things that we do to reach the end goal, which is reducing those casualties on the road.
And I think it's worth mentioning, this is a perfect time to say, many of you may either be here because you already know who Owen is and have absolutely soaked up lots of his content, or many of you might be thinking, I know that face, where is that face from? And you actually collaborate with George, GCM, George's Car Media, over 1 million. Look at that, the new Afro has got the plug-in. Some guests want to do books, some of the other. Now we've got the new GCM merch. Yeah. But you actually collaborate with George, who's built over 1 million followers on TikTok. You've done it together through the use of the videos and the way that George edits them and puts them together. Basically explaining, giving people tips, advice, showing them situations all related around road safety with the goal of reducing deaths on the road and crashes, accidents, incidents.
Yeah, that's the main goal. But there's also the aspect that we are helping people to not get in trouble. So, if somebody listens to what we're saying, changes something maybe on their car, like a modification that we've explained is illegal for whatever reason, and they change that and make it legal, then they won't get stopped by the side of the road. They won't get a ticket. It saves them money, saves them hassle, and it saves us having to stop them by the side of the road and spend time with them that we could be spending doing something that's more useful than dealing with somebody's window tints.
Now, that's quite exciting to me, because one of my favourite things to do sometimes on the podcast is just have a good old-fashioned debate. It's really nice because you make me feel comfortable enough to be able to do that, and share details with an active officer. So maybe I'll have to be careful of every story that I necessarily tell. But I think it'd be great today just to have some of those debates. And you actually were on your way back from filming another video today where you were collaborating with Carwow.
Yeah, so today we've been filming with Carwow about cloned vehicles. So, the object of that one for me is to stop people from buying a cloned vehicle. Because the impact on them is massive when they start getting the tickets through the post. And it's like, that wasn't me. Yeah.
Take note of this, audience. I've just said let's have a good old-fashioned debate. He's already crossed his arms and puffed out his biceps like this. He is ready. He's ready to go. He was relaxed 2 minutes ago. And that's like, right, and now he's ready to go.
Yeah.
So to cut off before we start, a lot of the comments, because I know from previous experience, one of my most profound episodes that I absolutely loved that I've done on Road to Success was with Ben Pearson, previous Police Interceptor. It was just a wonderful conversation, and I learned a lot during that conversation and gained a really amazing insight into a world that we just don't get to see as the general public or experience or feel. And it's amazing kind of how Ben's come out of that after his time in there and how that's kind of affected him. But you, no doubt, and you said it before you came on the episode, there will be people in the comments straight away, you can't help it, just because you are in the police and you are spending time doing road safety content. That then triggers the thought of, hang on a second, my taxpayer money is going on this guy creating this content or sitting in this podcast van or going to Matt Watson car wow day. Do you want to just explain that the content, 90% of which, 95% of which that you produce that people see on the internet, most of which you do with GCM, that's actually completely in your own time and off your own back?
Yeah, it always has been. The initial idea was that we'd just do a couple of videos, and then 4 years later, we're still doing it. But yeah, obviously some of it has to be filmed in duty time because we're out in a car. So, we can't be filming that in my own time. But the fact is, we're out on patrol. So we are dealing with whatever comes in, and we are available to deal with whatever comes over on the radio. And that's, some of that we can show you, some of that we can't show you, because we have to think about the people that are involved in it. There's people who've got their own privacy, and they don't want to be all over TikTok when they've been involved in an RTC or whatever. But, that's not all we deal with. But I've lost track of where I was going.
That's all right.
But so basically, yes, most of it, 90+% of it is done in my time. So all the planning for it is done in my time. All the preparation is done. All the editing with George sending me edits. I have to turn my phone off at night because otherwise, I wake up in the morning with like numerous messages and edits and things. Oh, can you have a look at this? Can you have a look at that? I just do it in my own time, and it takes hours and hours and hours to do that, but it takes a minute to film a minute video, doesn't it? So
if you're listening to this episode and have your own business and need help with your digital marketing services, then I'm here to help. Just drop me a message, as I own Tweak Marketing, a leading agency specialising in technology, healthcare, automotive and many more sectors. We built websites from small individual one-man bands all the way up to huge global companies. We're here to help you take steps forward in your digital marketing. Get in touch with me via the link in the description and we'll hop on a call and see how we can help you.
Yeah. And no doubt George is listening to this. So hello, George. If you are, of course he is. To hear that, but I know that you've had a really profound effect on George and the stuff that you've basically, away from the camera and the people that have soaked up the content. I know how much the content that you've filmed and the stuff that George has learned. And I've actually done a podcast with George on Road to Success before. I leave the link to that in the description. Anyone wants to check it out, because he is a different person 4 years later, for sure, through going through this whole experience with you. But I think after kind of clearing up how you do the content, the kind of time split, whether you need kind of police equipment like the police cars, or whether you need to do it in work time, or you spend a lot of content doing out of work time, I think it's important before we get into the debate to actually understand who the person is that became the traffic officer, cares about road safety, and is resilient enough to shrug off a lot of the negative online hate, comments, abuse, everything that you have to deal with. So what is a pivotal moment in your earliest years that you can remember that you think sent you on the track to become the person that you are today?
Not sure that there's one pivotal moment. The one thing that kind of brought it home to me in the car stuff was when a friend of mine was involved in a fatal down near Southend. And that was in the days of the RS turbos, and the A127 was literally, it was horrendous on a Friday or Saturday night between the M25 and Southend, and anyone from my era will probably back me up on that. But a friend of mine was involved in a triple fatal, and he went to prison for causing death by dangerous driving, and 3 people died in that. And that kind of brings it home to you of, wow, yeah, this isn't a game. There's no reset when that happens. It's not like Forza. Not that Forza existed back there. We didn't have computers. But
Can you just put a year on that, a timestamp? Because it's relevant to something that I've actually got written down as a point.
in the 90s.
Yeah,
Really early, mid-90s, I would have thought. Early to mid-90s.
we'll pick up in a short while. I've actually got a point that's quite relevant.
Kind of Max Power era.
So that was a moment that kind of was a big thinking.
It was a big
point.
wake-up moment. Yeah, massive wake-up moment of, it could have been me. And, then I'd grown up from there, and I did various things before I went into policing. I used to manage swimming pools and indoor adventure centres and things like that, and then I got into policing after that. Yeah, but from doing the modified cars myself as a hobby, which is what I grew up with the Renault 5s and, all that kind of stuff, and then going into policing and eventually into roads policing, you've got that crossover between, yeah, okay, I grew up with that and I love doing that and I love cars and that, but also I've seen the other side of it. I see where it goes wrong. And, I understand things now that I didn't understand before. And, I guess the pivotal moment with regards to my drive to reduce casualties is delivering that death message. And there was one I remember where it was actually a motorbike, but I had to go and knock on the door and tell Dad, you need to come with me right now to get to the hospital before your son dies. And we had to take him up to the hospital and get him there in time. And that's not the only one I've done. It's and that's what, that's the one thing that will always stay with you. It's
what's it like dealing with the first time that ever happens versus the latest time?
It doesn't change.
7 in 10 of you listening to this episode aren't subscribed to the channel. If you're enjoying it in any way and have seen the huge amount of amazing guests we've managed to get on this podcast, then please do me a favour. It's just one click or tap. Hit that subscribe button. It means we can keep growing this channel, keep delivering with amazing guests so that you can end up listening to these episodes. Thank you.
It doesn't change. You're still dealing with people. You're dealing with emotions, and you're dealing with the people that are left behind. And for me, I can go and deal with what's on the road. That's one aspect to it. It's stuff that people don't see, and it's difficult to explain, but the vast majority of the general public will never see what we deal with. And when stuff goes wrong at high speeds, it's bad. It's bad, and that's not nice. But for me, it's dealing with the living that is what I remember more than dealing with what's on the roadside. And people do struggle with that. And going back to what you said about Ben, Ben struggled with it, and eventually it did what it did to Ben. And I'm sure people could go and watch that podcast to understand that, because Ben will explain it a lot better than I.
I will put the link to that one in the description as well.
But I've got colleagues at work that suffer as well, and it's something that does play on your mind, when especially it's the old thing of, if it's children, it's worse. Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's horrible. It's bad, and it's something that you don't want to do again, but it's going to happen. And there's no such thing as an accident. It's a collision, and generally somebody's caused it because they've done something wrong. And if we can just change people's driving behaviour and make them understand this stuff, the simple things like mobile phone, we still get fatals caused by people on mobile phones, and you're just like, come on.
So this is probably the right moment to say this. So you mentioned, if I get everything that I took in correct at the beginning, that first big moment for you was when your friend caused a death by dangerous driving collision. Is that correct?
Yeah.
When he was then behind bars, and I'll ask, what was that for? What exactly did he do?
Well, it's causing death by dangerous driving. Yeah, it was an incident with another car. He didn't actually touch the other car, but the other car left the carriageway into the trees.
So I know that speeding.
They were both driving on the road, and one of them left the carriageway. But there were other aspects to it.
But this lad was though, pre that incident, a good guy, a friend.
Yeah.
So then, when someone like that goes to prison, or is locked up for causing such a horrific incident where people have died, and then the network of trauma that ensues around that, are you able to be friends with a person like that once they've caused something like that and go to prison?
Don't think I've spoken to him since then.
Do you think that's right? I'm going to give you an example. Because we mentioned earlier that you mentioned that a particular collision, could have been that one, caused three deaths as a result of death by dangerous driving. So a short while ago, and I'm sure many people may have seen this, I may pronounce the name wrong, I think it's Michael Koprianas. He was a lorry driver who killed 3 people.
Yeah, on the A1.
This video appeared on Lad Bible, so it's been shared around the world, and he was using a sat-nav app on his phone while driving. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison after pleading guilty on 3 counts of causing death by dangerous driving. Now, I don't want anybody saying that I'm siding with the man that did that. But there's a small part of you watching that footage that if any of us, myself, anybody listening or watching to this, has ever picked up a mobile phone whilst driving and used it, whether it be to tap it for a phone call or to reply to a text or to do something even longer, or maybe even you're watching a video. People have varying degrees of how much they break the law of an instant. But there'll be an element of you which that could have thought that could have been me that caused that. And that will make you realise that chap is probably just a normal bloke. And he made a mistake in that moment. And to me, it just seemed very real that we see in this world, it's full of terrorists, horrendous people, countries and leaders that are willing to blow each other up, that aren't thinking correctly. And there's an element of sadness to me that another victim in this is the person that makes a mistake, but they don't realise the gravity of the mistake they're making. I think that's the profound bit, because I felt so sad for that guy when he went to prison, watching his family and kids that were then losing a dad over doing something like that. But then ultimately, if I was the family that had lost the individuals involved in the crash, I would be absolutely distraught and would want proper retribution. So do you get the point in which I'm saying, I think it's sad that, do you think the punishment is correct in relation for the incident if something like that is caused by accident?
It's not an accident though, is it? Why is it an accident? I'll throw it back to you.
Well, I suppose if you're breaking the law, you're correct. It's not.
I know that he shouldn't be on his phone. If you watch the video, he says that. He said it was a big mistake, and I knew. Because I use that video when we go into schools. And we teach like 6th form and those that are learning to drive. We use snippets of it. There has to be consequence. He's caused the death of 3 people. That's 3 families, potentially 3 families that have lost the most precious thing in their life because he was on his phone. So there has to be a consequence to those actions because he knew he shouldn't have been doing it. If he'd have been driving properly within the rules, and this is what I said, there's generally no accident, there's a collision. Because if everyone stuck to the rules, it wouldn't happen. when you learn to drive, you're taught to follow the highway code. When you pass your test, that doesn't stop, because you've got a responsibility to everyone else that's using the roads as well. Those 3 people left home not thinking, I'm not going to make it home for tea tonight. They thought they were just going to get home. And then a lorry goes into the back of them because he's using his phone.
And I think it's fair to say...
I don't think it was a sat-nav.
That's a fair comment.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say, you mentioned earlier, it's just your nature. It's the nature of if you asked 100 police officers the same question, I'm sure they'd answer it the same. Is that for some, it is more difficult dealing with a child that's died, usually up because of what's left behind and the impact. And it's just such a horrific thing. And there is something about it that makes that worse than other situations. Part of me wonders, like, I've experienced grief. My dad died very suddenly, didn't expect it whatsoever. And that to me triggered a completely different emotional response than when I've lost people due to old age or prolonged illness, where you get a degree of relief sometimes when someone passes, that they're over the thing that's really been causing them pain or trauma, or their family. You know, there's 2 different emotional responses to losing somebody. And the problem is with these collisions is that this is ending the life pretty much of people that in a very sudden way that it shouldn't have been ending there and then.
Nobody gets a chance to say goodbye. That's kind of a lot of it, isn't it? Is that, you know, that person's left home. And this is what I say to people by the side of the road. You know, when I stop people, say, who do you live with? And they'll tell me who they live with. And, you know, I say, well, just think about me knocking on the door, telling your wife and your children that you're not coming home tonight. And that has a bigger impact on people than giving them a ticket a lot of the time. You can have more of an impact on somebody by explaining the reasons why we've stopped them than you would have by giving them a ticket. Because you give them a ticket, they'll just hate you for a bit, and then they'll go back to what they were doing before. Whereas if you explain this stuff, then sometimes that has that bigger impact.
It's fascinating you say that, because part of this conversation, and I'm going to try and word all this in the right way, because it's requiring every ounce of my brain to phrase things
I can see you
right way, is, you know, the old saying, read between the lines.
Yeah.
The law is between the lines. It's written in writing, and it can be clear. Some elements of it can be up to interpretation. Am I correct?
That's what we have lawyers for, yeah.
But most of the time, it's there in black and white, clear to see. But in some respects, do you think... I'm fascinated, and I find people fascinating. If there was more space between the black and white for people to make a decision that they think is informed, I wonder if they would then make the right decisions more. And my reasoning for that is this. In my head, when the M4... there's a long way about going this as well. At 9 o'clock at night, on a completely lit section of the M4, there's nothing on the road, no cars, vehicles, nothing. I almost feel, if I'm driving my Lamborghini very over the limit on that section of road, that I'm putting nobody at risk, bar myself if a tyre blows, and realistically, what's the consequence going to be on me versus 70 versus, just hypothetically, say 100? It's the difference. And I guess when you're doing it, say you are breaking the law, there's a thing in you which is, oh yeah, but this shouldn't be the law, because this just seems so safe. This just seems so fine in this context, what I'm doing here. That then would people follow the law more if they can understand, if there was a rationale to say that's fine in that circumstance for you to be doing that, similar to the Autobahn and some of the smart motorways in Europe. If, when it's then very busy and very rainy and very wet, the signs flash up 60, and you know that if it's a wet day in poor visibility conditions, it's then a 60 limit, end of. Do you think more people would follow the law if they could relate to the fact that they actually thought it was sensible?
The problem is you've got if we're looking at it just in relation to driving, you pass a very, very basic test, which basically says that you can drive from there to there without bumping into anything or running anyone over. That doesn't teach you how to drive. as such.
Correct.
Everybody thinks they're an above average driver. Everybody does. Looking at an above average driver. There we are, see?
I'm sure the heads that he went into would disagree.
In Toby's mind, he thinks he's an above average driver. And everyone thinks that. And if that's the case, who's the average driver? But everybody thinks that they're capable of driving at 80, 90, 100 mile an hour. I drive the motorway and I look at people driving at 80, 90 mile an hour and think, you haven't seen that, you haven't seen that, you haven't seen that. Their brakes are coming on all the time. That's one thing that really annoys me on the motorway is the amount of brake lights you see. You shouldn't be using your brakes on the motorway. You should be seeing what's going on ahead of you and planning for that. It's all about observation and planning, but they don't. They just get themselves stuck in this situation because they haven't seen it, or they haven't seen it till it's too late. They haven't planned for it. And then their only option left is to put their foot on the brake, which is then a chain reaction back because everyone else sees one set of brake lights and starts hitting the brakes. Not that there's any reason to do that, but it's because they're not looking far enough ahead. And I was talking to Ben the Stick, and he was saying about he doesn't see speed as an issue. I said, yes, that's because you're used to driving at that speed and you're looking and you're preparing. And
I agree with him.
Yeah, but you've got somebody else who thinks they're an above average driver that's not looking for the same things. And they don't know how to handle that car. And, anyone can go and get in, I say anyone that can afford to can go into a Lamborghini, and that Lamborghini is capable of 100 and whatever mile an hour. Is the driver capable of driving it at 100 and whatever mile an hour? Possibly not, because all they've done is passed I can drive from A to B. So I think the point I'm getting at is the level of training and the level of everything makes it impossible for us to change things. You've got to have a set of rules for everybody. You can't have a different rule at 10 o'clock at night and a different rule at 4 o'clock in the morning, because how are we ever going to enforce stuff like that?
Well, to challenge that slightly, in different fields, like the police, for example, depending on your rank, I guess, or even if you look at things like the army, you've got different rules and responsibilities, and you've got different things that you can do in life, in business, in work, in people that have gone to university and have gone into being surgeons or gone into hospitals. The degree of qualification that they've got to do a certain thing determines the degree of work that they'll be doing. So potentially, if we look at road safety as a whole and accidents, I'm only kind of thinking about this, I'm not even saying I necessarily believe it, but if we look at that scenario and think, right, what's the goal out of people reducing deaths on the road? We've got to increase the safety of the roads. Do you think people, let's say people, business owners with 10 plus years of experience driving, and they just want to sit at 80 to 90 to feel like they're getting around a bit quicker in a Range Rover in the outside lane, if they've done a Rosper Institute of Advanced Driving and have achieved a silver and higher, and they're willing to go back and do it every 3 years, that they can sit in the outside lane comfortable enough that they can go, when safe, up to that limit, and they've been through that extra qualification of driving, why are we not in a place in the world that we can allow that to happen? And then if they have the freedom to do...
You've got Bob, who hasn't done his advanced driving, who doesn't appreciate that Steve, who has, is coming up faster. Do you see what I mean? You've then got a mix of ability with one law for one and one law for another. From a policing perspective, how are we ever supposed to enforce? Because we'd have to stop that person to find out whether they've got the required skill level to be driving at that speed, and that person has, that person hasn't. We'd be there all day just trying to do it. And ultimately, the road network is there to facilitate transport, not to facilitate somebody who wants to get a thrill out of driving faster. And you know, I'm a car guy. I've always been into my cars, but when you look at it realistically, if you want to drive like that, the track's the place to do that, because there's less to bump into. Not on the motorway where you've got families and things around you, because if something does go wrong at 90 mile an hour, you're talking skittles. And it's chaos and carnage. And if you look at that then from the way that national highways will look at that, is a collision on the motorway that requires the motorway to be closed will cost the economy £1 million an hour. They don't want collisions on their network because it causes absolute chaos. So in my view, and it's not gospel, but in my view, you will not see the speed limit raised any more than what it is. If anything, you will see it come down because of the environmental stuff. You look at Cardiff, the speed limits on the motorway going past Cardiff are lower because that's an environmental thing, because the emissions are lower at the lower speeds. So if anything, I can see them coming down rather than going up. If you look at the autobahn, and everyone says, yeah, but it works on the autobahn. It works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, it's just death and destruction.
Is that your opinion? That was going to be my next question. You knew where I was going. You knew the next ammunition because you must have had...
The German driver training is very different to the UK driver training. They have to do a certain amount of hours in certain circumstances. So they do a certain amount of hours in the dark, a certain amount in the rain, etc., etc. As far as I'm aware. You've also probably got less cars on the road in a small space, if you know what I mean. Germany's much bigger, isn't it? So I haven't driven on the autobahns, but I would imagine there's probably less traffic in the de-restricted areas than there is in other areas, like in the UK. If you try to de-restrict the M25, it's just not going to happen, is it? So yeah, it's a very different set of circumstances, but from what I was reading up on, the Germans are looking to try and restrict the de-restricted sections, because when it does go wrong, it goes wrong in style.
Okay, that's quite a poignant point, because the faster you go in, the higher the likelihood.
Well, that's the thing with speed, isn't it? It's, speed doesn't necessarily cause you to crash, but the higher the speed, the higher the impact, and the higher the level of injury and the likelihood of death. That's the thing.
It's Clarkson's line that I famously never forgot, which it's not speed that kills you.
It's stopping somebody. He's not wrong with that. It is. But it's also, that reaction time that you've got. If you're travelling at 70 mile an hour, you're travelling at 105 feet per second. If you're travelling at 90 mile an hour, it's 145 feet per second. That difference is about the length of a tennis court. So if, for sake of the argument, you've got a reaction time of 1 second from seeing something to putting your foot on the brake, you've travelled the extra length of a tennis court before you've even put your foot on the brake. That is the difference between potentially not hitting the car in front and hitting the car in front. But then you see the following distances that people use on the motorway, and, this is the thing, isn't it? It's people don't drive how they were taught to drive. 2-second rule on the motorway. When do you ever see people doing a 2-second rule?
So, based on that, exactly what you said there, that leads me to, and probably the viewers as well, to think that I can clearly see the UK provides less driver training than a lot of countries. I don't think less than like the USA. I think it's very easy to get a license. All right, the USA. I think you drive at 16. I think you sort of turn up, go for a drive around the car park, and suddenly you've got a license. People will be shouting at me, and I think that's how it works.
In an auto.
Yeah, and definitely in an auto for sure. So, the current setup of how we learn to drive in the UK, even if you pile on rules, and I've actually been going to Cardiff more frequently recently. There's a nice female in Cardiff. Hopefully she may or may not be listening. And that 50 stretch I hate to God. And the only fun I have along it is when I get to the tunnel and down shit going into it. But it is strange actually, because there's somebody that does enjoy going fast and does enjoy inertia and speed and all the rest of it. After a short while you do kind of forget you're in it, and it just becomes the norm. So do we think that do you think road traffic deaths will come down? And with the current system as it is, or do you need fundamental changes in the way that driving is viewed in the UK, training, the lot?
Ultimately, it comes down to the drivers. The people know what's right and wrong, or most people do, but they choose often not to abide by that. And, people don't crash on purpose. But when you step outside the rules, how many campaigns do we have to do about drink and drug driving? Armstrong. How many drink and drug driving things do we have to do? Every year, every Christmas, we do the campaigns, and still people do it. We had 350 drink drivers in December in Devon and Cornwall last year. 350. And that's just the ones we caught. And that's in 4 weeks? People are still doing it, and they still think that it's okay to do that, and it's not.
So, if you keep hitting a square peg into a round hole, you're going to get the same result.
Mm-hmm.
So then why doesn't something fundamentally
That's why we started the GCM stuff, because it was something different.
But that's you, Owen, making a conscious effort. That's you making a conscious effort outside of being in the force and outside of the country and the policing network as a whole. The whole basis, the whole fundamental law, everything that surrounds keeping people safe from the roads. My point is, they can't. Surely that we're hitting a square peg into a round hole.
There's an awful lot that goes on that you'll never see. There is so much in the road safety world that they're trying to do to address the problems. But at some point, there's a limitation, and to change the way people are taught to drive would take such a massive effort. I don't know whether it's achievable. That's the problem, isn't it? Because you've got so many people learning to drive every year that currently, I don't know what the waiting list is for a test, but
it's nuts.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's so how do you change that driver training thing? I mean, we're doing a little thing for young drivers that is kind of in between their pass and their advanced. So it's kind of a little bit of a stepping stone. And if they like it, they can go on to the IAM stuff, which you did. So that's something that we're trialing down in Devon.
Oh, and it's fantastic. Just to summarise that for people, I was lucky enough to have some performance cars at a younger age. And I was also lucky enough to have a great dad that cared about me and my well-being, had enough trust for me to go out and drive them. However, made me go and do a Rosper Institute of Advanced Motorists course, which I remember doing in my 2011 VW Caddy van. And one of the saddest pieces of information within a day of starting the course, because I was going to be in this van for a week, with a very old chap next to me that didn't speak much and didn't care for my jokes at all, which I found out on the first day. He was there to train me, and that was that. As I sped up coming out of Lechley, going towards Burford, near where I live, he said, "Right, what are you doing wrong already?" I don't know. So I'm looking at everything. I'm doing 60s, no vehicles on the road. He said, "Well, for the second, you're in a van, it's a commercial van, and you're doing 60. So I then had to, with gritted teeth as a young gun, drive around at 50 mile an hour for the duration of the entire week, which made me feel like I wanted to slam my head against a brick wall. However, what I picked up on that week was the single most important skill that I've taken through my driving, and I'm quite proud of the fact that within 8 years of driving lots of performance cars on the road, doing nearly 500,000 miles on the road, I've done loads and loads of miles. And the worst thing that I've ever had happen is a deer run out in front of me and collide with. And I think that was down to doing that Rosper Institute of Advanced Motorist course. And I think it was also down to really learning about your eyes and the limit point. That is the most fundamental thing that I've taken into my driving all the time, is just where you're looking. So do you want to just explain, as an officer, someone that has traffic driving training, what you have to go through to be put into the position where you're trusted to take vehicles beyond the limit, beyond the speed limits, to help prevent crime?
So currently with us, you do your basic course that just lets you drive your Vauxhall Astra with no blue lights or anything, completely highway code compliant. From that, you'll go on to a standard course, which then allows you to use your exemptions, which is speed, keep left bollards, and red traffic lights. And then after that, if you get onto one of the specialist units, I think the standard course is about 4 weeks now, and that's every day, 4 weeks. And then once you get onto traffic or a specialist unit that requires the high performance vehicles, and then you're doing advanced course, which is another 4 weeks in the advanced class. So yeah, altogether you're what, 8 weeks or so to get you up to that, and then you have reviews. I think it's every 3 years we have our reviews, and that's and then you got TPAC and the specialist skills on top of that. So I think TPAC's another week.
So why not tell us a story about when that really hits home? What's one of the first times that you ever remember going out and using a lot of the skills that you were taught in call it in combat?
To be honest,
You must have some stories.
years ago. You're talking years ago.
What was it like performing a first TPAC?
It's like asking you what you did when you were 3. I don't know. It's just, the thing is, for us, it's just what we do.
How frequent? Okay, so then let's change that question. Are you unable to answer that because of how frequently that actually happens? So we see 50 episodes of something on TV and some really exciting, engaging stuff. And it's very rare that as drivers, because there's so many of us, we actually see something occur out on the road. How often do police chases occur?
So we try to avoid pursuits. Pursuits is probably one of the highest risk things that we could do. It's risky for us. It's risky for the person in the car that would be being pursued, and it's risky for everyone else around it. So the last thing we want is to have a pursuit. So we will do what we can to stop it happening in the first place. And, that is quite a lot of the TPAC stuff, is to prevent the pursuit happening in the first place. And, if there's too high a risk, then we won't pursue anyway. It's just not worth it. So, yeah, we need to balance up the risk versus the reward. What we're going to gain from it, and what's the risk to that. Do you see what I mean? Because we're potentially putting lives at risk in pursuing a vehicle. So are we going to pursue it for a 50p Mars bar? No, we're not.
And what if you get that decision wrong? What are the consequences?
We end up in court. And this is the thing. If it goes wrong, we end up in court. So we don't have much protection. We've got our exemptions, but if you take our exemptions of speed, keep left bollard, and red traffic light, take red traffic light. We've got an exemption to that, so we can go through the red traffic light. However, if we cause a collision by going through that red traffic light, we're at fault.
So what still drives you to do it?
For me, I've been in quite a long time now, so I'd like to think that my decision making is quite balanced, and I don't get that kind of, we've got to do it. Do you know what I mean? I'm looking at the risk, and if I'm seeing risk and thinking, do you know what, this is not worth it, then we stand down, and that's it, and they come again another day.
Would you agree with the statement that the public's perception of the police is at an all-time low?
No.
Why?
The media and social media are looking for hits, aren't they? They want likes. They want people clicking on their webpage. They want people watching their program. So when do you ever hear a good news police story? When was the last time you heard a good news police story?
Never.
How many bad news police stories do you hear? All of them. All the time. Yeah, and that's because that sells. Every day you have got thousands of officers that are turning up to work 24/7 shifts. They leave their families and they go out to do probably one of the highest risk jobs that there are. Okay, in more ways than one. It is very high risk. Even when I was in custody as a custody sergeant, you don't know what's coming through the door next, but you're responsible for that. Whatever comes through the door, you're responsible for. And if that person dies whilst they're in your care, that's your fault. It's high risk. What we're in now, when we're driving fast, we have to get to stuff quickly. So if we're driving in 3 figures, if it goes wrong, it's back on us. Do you see what I mean? And people are coming in and their workloads are increasing, and it's not helped by everything that goes on in the media that's constantly having a go at them and not showing off the good stuff that they're doing. The prisons are full, yet we're told we don't catch burglars and stuff. Well, they don't just present themselves at prison and go, here I am, do they? The prisons are full because we're putting people in prison. But that's not what's put out on the media. What's put out on the media is detection rates and things like that. And, there are some things that, I don't know, it's difficult to explain. It's a very difficult job.
I live in the middle of a rural countryside, and we have a tremendous problem with rural crime at the minute.
Yep.
There is so much stuff being stolen around here. It's just biblical. When you actually start to hear the stories of stuff that's happened on estates or what's happened on farms and equipment, mostly that kind of robbery, that it genuinely makes you feel unpleased when you look into it. I've got a friend that owns a tree care company locally, and he has been seriously looking at setting up, in collaboration with the police in the local area, a security response vehicle team that businesses and private estates and individuals can basically pay a monthly fee to have somebody in an all murdered out urban Defender, for example, with big lights and horns and guns, all the rest of it, just so that Mrs. Smith that sat on her own evening, or an old couple with, some outdoor barns and some stuff in them and all the rest of it, genuinely believes someone's coming. Because if you ask 20 people that own rural properties around this area randomly, if they think that someone would turn up within even an hour from space, they'll all say no. And that for me is an issue. Now, you can't comment on that. I know it's not your location. I know it's not your field. But my point is, it's perception.
Yeah.
Like, you can't help but hear what you hear in the world.
I get that. I do get that. And, I get that it's not a perfect scenario. But that's not the fault of the officers that are out
duty.
Yeah.
Are we understaffed?
The resources that we have probably aren't adequate for everything that we're trying to do. You've got to remember that, in the last 15 years, things have changed greatly. You've got more online crime, which we didn't have 15, 20 years ago. It just didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have to police that. There are more pressures on policing now than there probably ever have been, because what was there 20 years ago is still there, but now you've got more stuff, like the online stuff, like, you've got your terrorism stuff, and everything has to be policed. They cut roads policing quite substantially, 10 years or so ago, and we're just starting to recover from that. But when you start taking resources from one thing and put them into something else, something's got to give. You just can't keep moving people around, because at some point...
This is more political, and I try not to get political on this ever. In fact, this could be one of the first times I ever did. So this is why it then absolutely infuriates the shit out of me when I see people like our Prime Minister bringing in rules to try and police people smoking in outside places. How on God's earth are you supposed to deal with that when you're already suffering with a lack of resource? Like, it just baffles me that we could be that backward. But then this is obviously raising the...
What we need is for the media, and largely the mainstream media, to stop this negativity and actually get on and back us with stuff. Because what it ends up with is, I'll give you an example. My team won a national award from TyreSafe, and that was work we did on an engagement and education program, because 3.5 million tyres, or million vehicles on the UK roads, have got defective tyres. So it was all about, engagement and education around that kind of stuff. And we put that out on Facebook, and it just got absolutely slaughtered with negativity and speed camera and revenue comments.
Yet, even me saw what you did. And today, just before you turned up, this van went in for 4 brand new tyres because they were a little bit too close for my liking, the legal limit. One of them had been a bit chopped up by one of the wheel arches, and I thought they needed to be a little bit more lower profile. And that genuinely, if it wasn't for your and George's content, I don't just say that because I don't necessarily agree with everything. We've all got opinions. But if it wasn't for a lot of the content, I don't think people would think twice.
Now, and that's the thing with our content is if one person watches a tyre video, goes out and checks their tyres and thinks, oh, that's getting a bit low, I better change that. It's done its job. It's taken us a minute to film it. George has put it out. And
so I had a friend whose tyre exploded on his X5M. I think he was on the M40, and it flipped and went into a post, and somehow he was unharmed. I have no idea how, but it is crazy that the more recently I've been, I've actually become fascinated with tyres. I think if people get into cars, you do become fascinated in tyres and brands and how they perform, whether you're on track, on road. Like, it is actually crazy that you think a piece of rubber can have that much difference depending on what condition it's in.
Yeah. And it's it's the only part of your car that should be touching the road.
So, but I don't want to skirt over. There's clearly a need from this conversation for more people to join force. I'm guessing you guys are actively recruiting all the time.
They're always recruiting. I don't get involved in recruitment.
So on the whole, we need more people to be inspired, people to understand why it matters and be able to join the force, which is why you do your content with George, because it's there to inspire and it's there to educate and it's there to try and... There's no part of it that goes out that has a negative impact on the world.
Absolutely not. No.
And from what I'm understanding, you're driven by a drive to try and make a dent into the negativity around social media and policing.
Yeah. I think, a lot of people say that it has made a difference to them, and they've seen policing in a different way, because a lot of people will never have an interaction with the police. But they just see what happens on it. Yeah. I wasn't going to go that way. But they see what the media feed them. And I've had this argument with family members that have tried to tell me about stuff, when we had the riots and what have you. They only see what the media want them to see. They don't see the bigger picture of what we see. And that's not their fault. I would suggest it's more the fault of the mainstream media. And like I said, if they got behind us and were a little bit more positive, then we would see that change in perception, and you would see more people getting on our side, and you would see society being better off for that, rather than the constant police bashing.
So do you think it's going to get worse before it gets better?
I hope it doesn't get worse, because it's not very nice. It's not very nice seeing it all the time. When you go and do the job that you do and you're passionate about doing it, and, you see yourself as fair in the way that you deal with stuff. And it's then quite demoralising to constantly getting battered for stuff that there is nothing that you can do anything about. And a lot of that is because people just don't understand the bigger picture of what policing is and what we do. It's
then a
very complicated world.
How do you sell it to someone to go into the police force? Because I'm not seeing any sales points.
Well,
what I'm seeing is you can go to court.
Don't fancy it there.
You can go to court for making the wrong decision.
Yeah.
The pay isn't on the whole the same as surgeons or some top level people.
You won't find any rich police officers.
Which I've heard.
It's got to be something within you.
You're going to have abuse.
I still go to work with the same reason that I went on my first day 21 years ago. And that is to help people in probably sometimes their darkest times. And if I can make a difference to those people just by being there and sorting some stuff out for them and, whatever, and spending that time with them, then that is what will continue to drive me. I'm not in it for promotion. I would have done it by now if I was in it for that. I'm not in it to earn loads of money. That's never going to happen. It's like the GCM stuff. I'm never going to earn a penny out of that. I never will, because, well, we're not allowed to, for a start.
So even if George, 1 million followers on TikTok, he's just started working with a chap that he introduced me to, is Dan Smith at Driven Talent. Fantastic bloke. He manages lots of us influencers, gets us deals with all sorts of brands, and we can make money off the content that we do, so that we are able to make that content. There's overheads to this stuff, guys. It's insane. But even if George had a month, and he's going to laugh when I say this figure, and it had made 100,000 a month, he's going to think, Jesus Christ Almighty!
George makes 100 a month.
Yeah, literally, that's what he's gonna say to me. But just hypothetically, so that's the case, he could not then give you any money as a reward for doing that content legally.
No. Okay, so
I'm not sure that's right.
Take this for an example. Somebody kindly drew a picture of my RS and George's ST when I had my white one, and sent it in to George. George did a photocopy of it to give me the photocopy, and I had to declare that to professional standards as a gift. And eventually, after asking me how much it was worth, which is, I don't know, probably 10p, it's just a piece of paper, they agreed to let me keep it. I can't earn a penny out of it. And, we've had plenty of offers, but I'd say no to everything. And, George will tell you that. I can't earn a penny out of it.
So you better get writing a book for retirement. Sounds like not a bad shout to me.
It's not a great deal financially, yeah.
So can you only earn a penny out of that content if you are no longer involved in it?
Yes.
Have you ever thought about no longer being in the forces but going into road safety content full time?
No, because still to this day, and even though I'm getting old now, I still like to get in the car and go out and deal with stuff. I still, if I'm sitting in the office and a job comes in on the radio, I'll jump in the car and go, and I'll help out my colleagues at it. And that's what we're there for.
I'm going to give you an example of a job that would have come into a colleague that you probably wouldn't know from a completely different force, but it would have definitely been whoever deals with Swindon, and it would have definitely been on the M4 on, I can't remember whether it was Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve 2 years ago. It was one or the other. I can't remember which one it was.
You're definitely asking for a friend. Or...
No. I'm trying not to incriminate someone. But a very kind gentleman let me keep my licence one evening. It was his decision to let me keep my licence. It was a great lesson to me, because if I'd have lost that, that would have been horrendous for me with work and business. I probably could have made it work. But good mood, music on, heading over, I can't remember again, Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, drink at a friend's house, coming down the slip road of the M4. I was in an AMG GTR at the time, completely empty slip road in front of me, nothing on the motorway. Pulled straight down the slip road, indicate on, singing. I was so happy. It was like just time over all the rest of it. I looked in the rearview mirror. There was a little white light on the corner of the BMW X5 behind me that was completely unmarked. And I went, no.
Bad timing.
No, and then I pull out, he pulls out, I pull in, he pulls out. So I was like, okay. I'm a bit concerned even talking about this, because I don't want to name any names. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I was then pulled over into a lay-by, and this was the conversation that happened. Do you understand how fast you were just going? I said, I've got an idea. I'm going to give you a chance. If you can get within 5 miles an hour of what you were doing, and you tell me within 5 miles an hour, I might consider being kinder than usual. Because I'm guessing that you need this for your work, your job, your career. I said, yes, very much so. So then your thought process goes, right, well, do I say less than something that could put me in prison? Or do I say what I actually think, that what I was actually doing? Or because I wasn't actually aware, really, to be honest. So I thought I can either go high or low. I chose to go what I thought I was doing, and I got within 5 miles an hour of that number that probably should have seen me in a lot of trouble. He then got another call coming that he had to attend and drove off. So don't do it again. Do you think I was right of him to do that?
Yeah. If you learnt from it, if it had the effect, that, like I said earlier on, he could have given you a ticket or put you in court. Would you have learnt from that as much as what he's done has remained in your memory?
Was it legal for him to do that?
We have our discretion. Yeah, it's that the beauty of it is that we do have some discretion as to what we can do. And it depends on, I don't know whether he got a speed on you or not.
Very much so. He showed me it.
He showed you it.
It was on the screen, crystal as day,
right.
And I was 2 miles an hour on it.
Right. Yeah. So, it's sometimes it comes down to what we think is the best outcome for everybody. And if that means dealing with you with words of advice, then yes, we can do that. The speed camera doesn't have that. The speed camera just goes bing, and look, that's the difference. But
I've got to talk about this because if I don't, George will be crying at me. When you walk into my garage before you leave and take a look at the couple of cars that I've got in there, what do you think the first thing is that you might notice about them?
Probably I've got no front plates on.
Correct.
Yeah.
Why do you think I'm so confident to get away with that sire?
Probably because you don't have a fear of getting caught and you can afford the fine anyway. Because when we went to Ferrari said they will choose to run the car with no front plate because they just allow X amount to pay for the fine because there's no point.
Because it suits me to do that I prefer the look of the car without it. It reduces the risk if I was ever crossing the line. If I come round a corner into my local town, there's a camera van and there's no front plate attached to the car and there's nothing to go off of. If that's
not strictly true.
Okay. Explain.
A lot of them have cameras on the top that they can just turn around and get the rear plate.
But if...
how do you think they get motorbike?
If I'm not in that... oh, no. it's all coming crashing down.
With how would your insurance feel if your car that's in the garage that's running no plate got stolen?
Probably got theft.
Yeah. Is it going to appear on ANPR cameras?
Well, then why can't they just turn the camera around?
How are we going to find it? How are the police going to be able to find your car if it's not pinging ANPR cameras? So for the insurance company, are they going to get their car back? Are they going to pay you out because you chose to not run the front plate? Playing devil's advocate.
There's a scary prospect. There's a balance up and a weight between the two, isn't it?
And I've just been filming about the cloned vehicles.
But then, as a force,
yeah,
you could stop that issue straight away. Why don't you? Because I can get away with that. Whether it be right or wrong, whether the thoughts I have about doing it and the reasons I'm about doing it, whether I think that I'm getting away with something that I probably wouldn't be or not.
There's many different reasons.
That issue could be stopped tomorrow with a law change.
In what way?
At the minute, it's £100 fine.
Oh yeah.
Who are the people doing it? Well, supercar owners, performance car owners. It's £100 fine. And what? We think we just got out of that. It's absolutely no problem. Okay, there's something there that's like, okay, if you've got personalised reg, that if you're a repeat offender, you can have the reg taken off you.
Yeah.
I don't. Doesn't matter at all. Why not just change the law? Why not just be like, okay, if you've got no front plate on, 12 points you're banned.
If they made it endorsable, it would stop it. Yeah.
Or 6 points. You've got to run the risk that it could have just fallen off. I genuinely came home from my street food truck, Gert Wings, in my 488 Pista a few weeks ago before I sold it, that didn't have a front plate on. And the rear plate actually fell off on the way home. It was only when I pulled it into the garage and went to close the door down as I walked past it coming out. Where's the plate gone? It had literally flown off the car. So there wasn't a front or rear on the car at that point. So I'm guessing you have to build stuff in that plates can just fall off. Like there is a limit of that. But my point is, there's so many things that surely would be solvable, reduce the amount of time that you have to spend stopping people giving tickets. Why doesn't this stuff just get changed? Why doesn't it get changed?
The thing with enforcement and what people don't understand about sometimes with the modified car world, and that is, sometimes we have to be quite ruthless with it, and we have to deal with what's there in front of us. Now, the reason for that is that if we've got something that we think, okay, that's dangerous, that modification is dangerous or whatever, then we cannot let that car go. Because if we let that car go and then it's involved in a collision,
yeah, that makes sense.
Who are they coming for? They're coming for us because we had the opportunity to stop it. So no traffic officer is going to let that car go just for, hi, I'm going to be nice today and I'll let you drive it away and let's not worry about it. Because they don't want to end up gripping the rail in the coroner's court.
No, I totally understand.
And, that's the thing. The person that is driving the car is ultimately responsible for the way they drive and for their motor vehicle. It's not the police officer's fault that they've done what they've done, or, they've made that dangerous mod, cut their springs or put window tints on. People get upset about window tints. But sadly, that's what the law says. And I'm not being funny, but in the UK, we get like 3 days of sun a year. It's not like we're living in Florida.
I want to ask something that's a comment that I see. It's a horrible question, and it's something that I see, and it's completely irrelevant, but it's something that I know people comment. So sometimes doing this role as a podcast host, I have to sometimes think about the commenters and closing off their questions before they answer.
I'm not going to say anything that I haven't heard, I'm sure.
Were you bullied at school?
No, I wasn't bullied at school. No.
So the common perception that the only people that can go into the force people that have had trauma in their earliest years.
It's just one of those. It's just those things.
Why do people draw that line? That's my point. When I'm talking about why get into the force, I want to leave this with a reason to do better. So as human beings, we should look after each other. And if looking after each other is entering something that can actually cause
generally, whatever we go to, one person's going to be happy, one person's going to be unhappy, aren't they? Because we've got to do something. Wherever we go to, we've got to do something. And we are going to upset people. And sometimes their only interaction with us is bad. But, that's not necessarily our fault. We have to do what we have to do. And, as we've said, if we don't do what we need to do, then it's us that end up in trouble for that. Do you see what I mean? So some people are going to like us, some people aren't. And I don't think that's ever going to be resolved. But when you talk about the general perception of policing, you're going by what people on social media comment. You're not going by the rest of the population, because people will generally put on a negative comment. You've only got to look at, our stuff. People will look at, and depending on the platforms, each platform's different. We get a lot more negativity on Facebook than we do on the other ones, because it's a different demographic that are watching it. Yeah, it's really strange. And a lot of people will just be looking for negativity in whatever you do. Doesn't matter what you do, they're still looking for a negative point in whatever you do. And the person that actually gets value from what you're doing doesn't feel the need to put a comment on. They just move on to something else, but they've taken something from it. And, even the negative comments that we get, it's like, yes, but you still watched the video. You still watched it. That's, to me,
I understand.
That's the aim of it, is you've watched the video and you've learned something from it by watching it. What you choose to do with that knowledge is entirely up to you, but at least you've watched it.
There's actually another reason that I asked the question about were you bullied at school. There was more meaning to it than just like the jokey side of that's what gets commented, that's the kind of perception piece of us. It actually surrounds that what you spoke about right at the beginning, which is the impact of having to deal with what is left when someone has a major RTC or passes away on the road, and what's left behind, what you see, feel, touch, have to go through. that takes a degree of mental strength.
Mm-hmm.
It is my perception of the world that people are getting softer, not tougher.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the best businessmen that I meet, some of the best people in life, some of the best drivers, some of my friends, I tend to surround myself with pretty tough people. And I don't think I'm wrong for saying that. Yeah, that I kind of like a bit of toughness, a bit of mental resilience about people sometimes. There's some really tough, strong people out there. Is it a concern that potentially... Do you have to be a tough cookie to go into the business? And if you are someone that struggles a little bit more with controlling emotion, are you the right person to go into this?
Yeah, you've got to have a certain amount of resilience. Yeah, because you are going into difficult situations. As a response officer, you're going into people's homes, and you're dealing with tough stuff. Sometimes domestic stuff, violence. You're dealing with people at the lowest times, and you're dealing with nasty stuff quite a lot of the time. If it was good stuff, we wouldn't be there. You see what I mean?
Is anything done when you join and you're going through the ranks to get to different positions, to a position in which you had to do something like that? Is any test ever done to see how tough somebody is to be able to do that role? Whether they've actually got the mental strength required to be able to do that? Or whether that could actually harm that person more? Because there's a great saying that I love that my dad always had, which is, we've got to be careful that sometimes we don't set people up to fail.
Yes, yeah. I'm not involved in the training world. Obviously, I'm not. But I would imagine that they have means to look at that as they go through, because people are put through scenarios. They're not just shoved straight out on the street and told, you can crack on and deal with that. They do go through a certain amount of training. They go out with, training officers and things as well before they're let loose on independent patrol. But yeah, I'm sure there probably is psychological sort of thing involved in it, but it's not really in my world. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's rare that you go to a good thing, because nobody calls you for a good thing. You're going because something's gone wrong somewhere for somebody. So,
do you always look for a positive within the negative? If something's happening, if a horrific situation has happened, will you try and spin that with the work that you're doing with GCM and George into, can we educate someone from this and what's happened? Like, is that the only way you get through this, to create these positives?
Sometimes it's soul destroying when you put so much into it and then you get another fatal come in. And you're just like, what do we need to do? What have we got to do? Especially when it's, a drink driver. Or somebody on their phone, or something basic, fatal fire. One of the big ones is seatbelts. They're dead because they didn't put on their seatbelt. You think, if you'd have just put on your seatbelt, you would still be here today.
So I know you're not in control of this, but then this is the whole part of the philosophy of our world and the way it runs that I just can't grasp and get my head around, because it is my belief. I know you sit there and say, when I say, well, why can't we just solve that then? Why can't we just change it like that and do something if we're actually talking about a loss of lives and humans? It's my belief that we could. It's just the way that we've mixed ourselves up in jurisdiction and red tape and paper, where we've totally screwed ourselves over. That ultimately, seatbelts. We know that if something beeps 55 million times at us, it's going to do our nutting in the end. You're just going to flip and get rid of the
But people will find a way round
to put the seatbelt on. Agreed. So, but why isn't this in place then? If speed is the issue, one of them. If speed is the issue, if driving on a mobile phone is the issue, yes, there are ways around that. But I'm convinced that we are capable as a nation of sorting that out. I'm convinced that we're capable of saying to a pub or a restaurant and enforcing more. If X person has 3 drinks and you see them getting in a car, if you don't dob that person in, you are in breach of the law. Like why, if it is causing a loss of life, are we not doing something about it?
Because I think sometimes you've got to put the onus back on the people that are doing it. It's, you can't keep flogging a dead horse as it is. Let's take the drink and drug driving. Everybody knows they shouldn't do it, yet they choose to do it anyway. the onus is on them to stop it. We can't. There's only so much that we can do. Yeah, we can say, if you get caught, this is what's going to happen to you. People still take the risk. You could kill somebody. People will still take the risk. And I think some of it is, if that was somebody running around with a knife, society would treat it very differently. But because it's road death, it's seen as kind of, yeah, well, it happens. But it doesn't need to happen. You know, far more people are killed on the roads than are ever killed in violent knife crime. Far more. But it doesn't even make it to the news. Yeah, between 4 and 5 people are killed on average every day on the UK roads. 28,000 are killed or seriously injured every year. That, to me, is not acceptable. And if I can do something to just stop 1 or 2 of those, then, yeah, that's a good thing.
Well, I hope that what you've put forward today, and not just today, for all the work that you do with George and GCM, I like to see people amongst great groups of people come forward and do something different, and actually try and do something different and make a difference by doing something like the work that you're doing with George. Every video that goes out, every view. And also, just on a personal note, I think sometimes, I said this to Alex yesterday, Kirsten and Taylor, and a lot of the YouTubers that come in, all of us, when we get involved in social media, forget the importance of one view. You know, if you did a TikTok with George and it got out and went out and got 1 view, YouTube would think they hadn't even been posted properly. Like, you'd be pretty miffed. Like, you wouldn't even understand what had gone on 1 like, for example. Yeah, that could actually save a life. So yeah, no matter how many views this episode gets, no matter how many views the TikToks get, I think what you're doing is unbelievably profound and is ultimately going to save people's lives. So thank you for taking the extra time to come and speak to me today on my podcast, Race to Success. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't done already, unless you are totally sick of my voice, at which point I would totally understand if you don't want to. But thank you again for coming on, Owen, and I'm sure we'll catch up in the future.
Can I go fishing now?
You can go fishing now, thank you.